Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly Potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Brewing. As always, it's presented by Blake, the attorney Maislin. We're a couple of days short of the Bengals preseason opener. The Reds continue to slog along. The Olympics are going on, which I will admit I've not watched much other than basketball and golf. Maybe Rick has. So we've got a lot to get to. Rick, let's get to it.
All right, well, let's start with Bengals training camp. That's the biggest thing going on in the city right now. We'll go through some storylines from the second week of camp. We'll start with Wednesday's practice, which was making headlines because there were all types of fights going on, Skinny. There were 4 fights at practice on Wednesday. That was the big takeaway from all the media types afterwards. What were your thoughts after a day of fighting at training camp?
So here's what happened. There's really no, they've had one that we know of live tackling period. There seemed to be one on Tuesday as well that only the defense seemed to know about, and that might have sparked what took place on Wednesday, or actually on Monday rather, because they were knocking them around a little bit. So what happens, I think, is honestly with no live tackling, what you get running backs or wide receivers who make a move, right? And what the defense does is they tag off on a guy to basically say, I was there to make the tackle. And then there's an assistant coach or two that blows the whistle to blow the play dead. And then there's yapping that goes on. And so the yapping, I think, got to an extreme point yesterday. Then the defense got a little physical. It actually started with the offense. Ted Karras admittedly finished off a block a little too long on Logan Wilson. They both went tumbling to the ground. Logan came up and swung at him. And that kind of got the ball rolling, because from there it felt like every other play here came something different. And then probably the end all of it was Andre Yoshavash getting whacked pretty good as he was going in the end zone by Jermaine Pratt, and that led to Ted Karras kind of marching down there and starting some more. From what I understand, Zach Taylor told the players that he liked teammates taking up for each other, but hey, let's be smart and careful. And I think you're at that point where literally it's time to go tackle somebody for real.
And that's part of it too, right? It's not just the fact that there's yapping going on and there's the question over, were you down or did you just break that off for a big, long gainer? It's also the matter of guys they're football players. They want to be hitting each other. Yes. And you keep blowing the play dead before they can actually do so. At some point, they just go a little bit too far and they get a little bit too physical. I mean, this is silliness. It's nonsensical. It's honestly kind of a big nothing burger. But when you're in the middle of training camp, there's not a lot to talk about. This is going to get some headlines.
Yeah, 1 or 2 probably isn't, but when you're up to 4, at some point as a coach, you're going, now you're wasting my time. You're wasting time by us having to continually separate you. So we've had enough of this part of it. So yeah, I mean, as far as the, if somebody getting hurt or whatever, no. But I do go back to, I do think that does, there used to be live tackling in practices and they've kind of done away with that. And I get that to some degree, but these guys are so testosterone-filled, competitive people that, so I shoulder bump you to the ground instead of tackling you to the ground. And then I'm going to tell you all about it. And you're going to tell me, oh, you didn't tag me there. I just broke that. I would have gone for 70 yards. And they're constantly yapping at each other. And again, sometimes it just spills over to what we got yesterday.
Can I just point out that football players who fight are the fakest tough guys in all of sports?
Because you're stupid if you take us. DK Metcalf of the Seahawks probably did the smartest thing. If you're going to do something, take your helmet off and swing it at somebody. I mean, use it as a weapon. But you taking a swing at a guy in a fully padded situation and his helmet's still on, that ain't too swift.
That's what I'm saying. You are legally allowed to take guys out and hit them within your sport. First of all, you waiting until after the play is dead to start fighting and being physical afterwards is just like a complete sign of you're not the toughest guy on the field. You are the weaker individual out there. And second of all, like you said, I mean, what didn't one of the coaches say? They've got $1,000 worth of stuff on protecting them. What a week! Right. Like, who cares if you're throwing punches at each other? It's ridiculous. In football, the enforcers, the scariest guys, are not the guys who fight. It's not like basketball where you have the goons at the end of the bench. It's not like hockey where you have the enforcer on your goon on your bench that comes in and starts fighting and you fear him. Even in baseball, there are those guys that are known for having a short fuse and like you throw inside him, he might come after you, or even the pitcher who's known for that a little bit. There are those guys that are feared a little bit. In football, the guys who fight aren't feared. It's not the guys who throw punches after plays that are feared. It's the big hitters that do it legally within the whistles.
Yeah, correct. And again, that goes back to when you're not allowed to tackle in practice. I just think that builds itself up. It really does.
Yeah. All right, Skinny, one of the other big storylines this week was the loss of Cam Sample. He's going to be out for the year with an Achilles injury, according to Zach Taylor. The Bengals went on. They signed defensive end Andre Carter, a rookie out of Indiana, and defensive tackle Joshua Pryor, a second-year player out of Bowie State University, who played in 7 games last year for Washington. So what's the immediate thoughts here with the Cam Sample aftermath? Obviously, he's not a starter, but he is a piece that was going to get some reps this year.
Yeah, but I think he slid down the depth chart a little bit by the drafting of McKinley Jackson, who now is hurt. We don't know to what extent that really is at this point. We'll find out actually after we tape this podcast. I'll be heading down to Bengals and Zach Taylor Talks today. I had him on my roster, but if you were to put a depth chart together, a real depth chart, not the one that they just did, which again they're doing things politically correct. He probably is the 9th defensive lineman, and he's he's filled a nice role for this team. He's done exactly what they ask. He's a great teammate, all the things you want out of a guy who's that part of your roster. But I don't anybody making this a huge loss is not selling it correctly. I feel sorry. I feel sorry for him because this is the final year of his rookie contract, which means he heads into a free agent offseason coming off of an injury. That's never fun or easy. You could see him maybe be re-signed here as a depth piece, because they know him and he knows them. That's the thing that's disappointing. But what do you lose from a performance standpoint? A deep bench role player, and if that's the least of your issues, then you're doing okay.
If is Pryor and Carter, the 2 guys they just added, are they just being added as extra bodies for reps in camp and to get them through the training camp or the preseason games?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, you've got Devonta Maxwell, who's a defensive tackle, hasn't practiced. Now, McKinley Jackson's hurt. Cam Sample's hurt. You're not going to play your starters a ton. So Sheldon Rankins and B.J. Hill won't play a lot. So that's Chris Jenkins and then Travis Bell and the kid they just signed. At the ends, Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard aren't going to play in the preseason opener. And then that means Miles Murphy and Joseph Osai will start. And then, how many snaps do they play? And then after that, you got the Jeff Gunters of the world, the Cedric Johnsons, who was a 7th-round pick, and then this kid they just signed. So, yeah, this is literally so I was down talking to Frank Pollock yesterday, and I saw these 3 getting ready to warm up, and I went, yep, I hope you guys make it because at least you're going to get some preseason games under your belt because, that's literally what this is to get you through some preseason games.
Skinny, you are typically the voice of reason here when it comes to the Bengals coverage. A lot of the other media types, they like to get really excited about things when they happen, and they really like to hype guys up and talk about them, and then we'll come back, listen to you, and sometimes you have a bit different take. So here's what I'm most interested to get your take on Andre Yoshivas, because everything I listen to, everything I read, Andre Yoshivas looks like Jerry Rice in his prime here through the first 2 weeks of training camp, and he's going to be a major impact player for the Bengals this season. Now, obviously, that's overstating it a bit, but it does seem like everyone covering the team feels very strongly about him being the leader as the 3rd receiver right now, and the opportunity that he'll have to make a big impact for this team. Is that a bit too much for training camp reps, or is he really turning some heads here?
I think he's doing a nice job. Yeah, I think he probably is the leader of the pack. If you're to put a 3rd wide receiver out there at the moment, the fact that he's learning to play in the slot has been helpful. He really didn't do that last year, and that's a tough position to learn. They've kind of taken Jermaine Burton out of that option at the moment and just stuck him back outside and said, listen, son, just go outside, learn outside this year, and then we'll figure it out after this. And that's not a knock on Jermaine. It's just the slot is such a nuanced position. Charlie Jones struggled with that last year, and then the injury set him back in that regard. And, that's what, you kind of take Tyler Boyd for granted, but Tyler was just so good at understanding all the nuances of what to do out of the slot. Sometimes you got to be a part of pass blocking protections, not a ton, but occasionally you have to be a part of that, maybe chipping in here before you go out on your route, and you got to understand some of those things. So I think that's the thing for Andre. The step he's taken is he's now able to be a versatile piece for them. And he's taken advantage of the reps he's been given too, and performed pretty well. I mean, I don't say he pops every practice. He just doesn't, but he's had moments where he's popped. I think all the receivers kind of have had those moments, even down to the Cedric Jacksons of the world have had moments like that. So yeah, I honestly, if I were to put a fantasy draft board together, I'm not sure he'd be on my draft board at the moment, depending on how deep you go in a league. But I'll be honest with you, the last few years, Tyler Boyd probably wasn't on that draft board either.
Yeah. Do you feel like he's clearly the 3rd receiver right now?
I don't know, man. I think Charlie Jones has made up some ground. And I thought Charlie, when they drafted him, the initial concept was they always seem to try to draft a year early for replacements. It doesn't always work out. It didn't work out with Cedric Ogbuehi. It didn't work out with Dax Hill, moving in for Jesse Bates. But they were trying to be make a preemptive strike with a slot receiver, and Charlie kind of fit that mold. So I think Charlie still has a legit chance. And honestly, I mean, to this point, we still don't know what Jamar Chase is going to do. So maybe it's both of them on the field when all is said and done.
There are receivers every year who are like Yoshivach, who are the long shot guy taken late in the draft or unsigned free agent, or they have a cool backstory. And in training camp, receivers are sort of the fun storyline because someone's got to make the catches. Someone's got to be out there getting reps and scoring touchdowns on the field. And it's one of the easier things for fans to see happen in a training camp setting. It's hard to really judge what the backup defensive tackle is doing, right, or what the extra safety, the young safety is doing. But you can see the wide receiver contorting his body, making a great catch. So every year there are these long shot guys that fans get excited about, that they're fighting for. They become sort of a fan favorite. They're like, hopefully that guy makes the team. And oftentimes you're just doing well if that guy can make it on the practice squad. But Yoshivach feels like he's got some real upside here. Is like he hung around last year. He's back this year and people are really talking him up. And he definitely has the full blown, like, the Ivy League story, the track star story, the hair, the look to him. He's got it all in terms of the fan favorite storyline. So that would be a fun one if he's able to make it work.
Yeah, and honestly, I the year that the Bengals drafted him, and there are always snap grades, right, the day of the draft, and you just go down and grade them, and it is what it is. It's, people do it, I do it too. And I gave that selection an A+ just because in the 6th round to take a guy with that kind of athleticism when you don't really need him at the time, but it's a future development guy, I thought was extraordinarily smart. And I think it's coming to fruition. I think at the very least he's a rotational piece. And I go back to this. I'll defer to Joe Burrow. When Joe Burrow talks about you openly, in a press conference setting, he's done that a few times about Andre. That's usually my litmus test of, is a guy doing the things that are going to make him be on the field. And when Joe talks about you, that usually speaks volumes, in my opinion.
And that's a good point. I should have probably led with that. That's what kind of took it from, I kept hearing it, reading it from other people's coverage. And then when Joe Burrow kind of made the comments he made end of last week, into the weekend, I believe it was, about Andre, it was like, okay, well, that's a little bit different when he says, like, Andre's going to have a really good year for us. I did take note of that. That was a little bit different to hear that. Finally, Jamar Chase, he is still sitting out, has not practiced yet. Skinny, are there any updates there? Do you sense that this is getting any more hostile or things are changing?
No, the only thing that's changing is he seems to change his hat every day. It's a different hat. So, I mean, that feels like that changes daily. No, I'm going to stick to my guns on this, and I'm probably going to be dead wrong. And for Bengals fans, I hope I am. Again, I could see this spilling over into the regular season, because if not, again, what did you do this for? And I've had people on the beat that say, well, he doesn't want to risk injury in camp. Okay. But so he's going to go risk injury in games playing on this $1.2 million contract for this year? That makes no sense to me either. If you're not going to risk it now, are you really going to risk it in games too? With still another year to go before you get to this extension? Are you really going to do that? Or are you just going to say, you know what, I can forego 1.2 mil because I'm going to make money down the line off of that? I
get why he would risk it. Why he wouldn't want to risk it in practice. And it feels different to do it in games versus doing it in training camp and in practice. Plus, let's just face it, Skinny. Training camp isn't fun.
No,
like there might just be the fact of, like, he just doesn't want to be out there doing this stuff that he feels is meaningless. So I do think there is the possibility that is happening. Now, that being said, in terms of what his leverage is, you're absolutely right. Him missing training camp and missing preseason games does nothing to make the Bengals budge. It only really affects them if he's going to actually sit out games. So in terms of building leverage to negotiate for his contract, you're right. This is doing absolutely nothing, in my opinion, other than creating a little bit of a distraction, a little bit of a storyline during training camp when everyone's looking for something to write about. Aside from that, I don't think the Bengals care at all if he sits out until the start of games. Now, if he wants to sit out games, that does change things.
Sure. No, I'll stick to my original prediction on this. And people laughed at me on the beat when I said this. They're like, oh, and I think I'm going to be closer to right than I was to wrong. I said August 28th. It's the day after cut down day. That's kind of the first practice as you start to get ready for the opener against New England. And that gives you the rest of that week into the next week, about 6 practices or so to get yourself ready to play. That feels about right, in my opinion. I don't know what statement that would have made for him other than he didn't take part in camp and didn't risk the injury thing. And you're really not risking that in practice preparing for games. And, I'm going to stick to that August 28th is when we see Jamar Chase as they get ready in earnest for that opener against New England.
And again, you said he's still there every day in a hat,
Yeah,
wearing
yeah,
different hats, and he's going through meetings and everything. So
yeah,
it's not like he's detached from the situation. It
correct,
is literally he's just not doing the physical activity of practicing.
correct.
All right. So we've got an Ask Anything question that's very specific to the Bengals in training camp. So we're going to do it now. Please rank these Bengals from most likely to be cut to least likely to be cut. Here's the list: Jackson Carman, Chris Evans, Brad Robbins, Zach Carter, Shedrick Jackson, Deontay Smith, Tanner McLaughlin.
All right, I'll start with Tanner McLaughlin. Is the most likely. They're not going to keep 5 tight ends, and you'll be able to stash him on the practice squad. I'll go Deontay Smith. He's been hurt, kind of out of sight, out of mind. I didn't have him on my original 53-man roster, and when you're not doing anything, and I like Deontay personally. I mean, again, it's just a football decision, and it's a shame because he hasn't been able to compete. He'd be next on my list of most likely. Chris Evans would be up there. I don't think they keep 4 running backs. I think they'd be more willing to keep 7 wide receivers than 4 running backs. I mean, you're going to play 2, and then Travion Williams is a good third. And you can stash Chris Evans on the practice squad and probably either go pick somebody up, or they've got 2 other undrafted free agents in camp and, keep one of those 2 guys on that spot. But you're not going to have 4 up for game day, in my opinion. Chris may have an outside shot to make it if he shows in kickoff returns. And I don't think he's going to be one of the first 2. I think it's going to be Chase Brown and Travion Williams. But if Chris does something in the preseason, maybe on kickoff returns, maybe he sneaks his way in there as a 4th guy. I'll go Shedrick Jackson next. Again, the 6 wide receivers seem etched in stone to me, and I'm including Jamar Chase as one of the 6. And it's Jamar, and you can disagree with this, but I'll give you the 6 that I have etched in stone, and then we'll go from there. The 6 are Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Charlie Jones, Andre Yoshavash, Trenton Irwin, and Jermaine Burton. Those are the 6. I don't see any of them not making this team. If you kept the 7th, it would probably be Shed. But they also signed Hakeem Butler for a decent chunk. They don't have to pay him if he doesn't make it, but he's a big-bodied guy. He catches everything. He's strong. I mean, this is a guy who was a former 4th-round pick of the Cardinals who actually came out of the draft with a 2nd-round grade. He was player of the year in the UFL. Talked to Troy Walters about him for about 10 minutes a couple days ago, and Troy, I was just kind of waiting for the soft shoe of, Hakeem needs to do this. He said, man, he's already in the playbook. He knows it. I said, I'm not a wide receivers coach, Troy, but he sure looks like he's a little bit slow out of his break. And he said, yeah, a lot of big body guys are, but he goes, I look at 3 things. Can you get off press coverage? He can because he's strong. What do you like at the top of your routes? He goes, he does struggle a little bit with that, and we're going to keep working on that. And 3, can you make contested catches? And he absolutely makes them. So he checks 2 of 3 major boxes for Troy Walters. And again, I think they like him a lot and would like to find a way to keep him or stash him on the practice squad. There were 2 others. I think Zach Carter now is, I had him as my 10th defensive lineman. I think the Cam Sample injury, and he was running with the ones a little bit in place of Sheldon Rankins yesterday in practice. I think Zach Carter is probably the most likely to make it in that group, and probably the 2nd most likely, and it's honestly by default, would be Jackson Carman. He hasn't been very impressive. He doesn't look very interested. But right now, I mean, the loser of the Amarius Mims, Trent Brown race, and Mims seems to be taking steps forward to win that race. That guy's going to be the backup swing tackle on game days, but I think you'll keep a 2nd tackle on the 53. And out of the rest, it's either Deontay Smith, who, again, hasn't practiced a whole lot, and I think Jackson's ahead of him anyway, and Devin Cochran, who's just gotten destroyed by, undrafted free agents and 7th-round picks. So I think it's Jackson by default. I mean, you could maybe say, well, Cody Ford could play swing, or could play tackle and guard, and maybe that knocks Jackson off the roster. I just think I think they still feel there's some untapped potential there that they'd like to see one final time to kick the tire. It wouldn't shock me if he gets cut, but in that list you just gave me, I think Zach Carter now has kind of locked himself in. So I'm going to say he's the most likely to make it. The 2nd most likely to make it out of that group would be Jackson Carman. Did I miss somebody?
Brad Robbins was the only one you didn't mention.
I'm going to have to play the 50-50 on that because I nobody knows until we see what the BYU kid Ray Cow can do in games. He's shown just incredible leg strength at times in camps. He had one the other day that was 75 yards. That was I think 5.6 hang time. I had him on. I don't time all these punts, but I timed him on that one. I'm like, holy Toledo. But he also, I've seen him hit him off the side of his foot for 32 yards. And so let's see what he does in a game when a team can rush him and, the pressure of punt. That's the thing. I think that got to Brad Robbins a little bit last year. I mean, there's something to the pressure of punting in games. It is how you got to see how a guy does. So I'm gonna take the fifth on that one just because I have to see what Rakow does in games. I think if Rakow shows that he can be consistent, I think he's got a bigger leg. And if that's the case, I could see them keeping him. I do think if you're Darren Simmons, you'd probably like the bird in the hand and maybe stash this kid on the practice squad and then let's see where it goes. And if 3 weeks into the season, Brandon Robbins is scuffling and this kid's killing it in practice, then maybe you go to the kid. I think you always defer to the guy you've at least seen do it in games before. And Brad's done it at a capable level in games, not a great level, but a capable level.
Well, they will get the opportunity to punt in a game for the first time, at least a preseason game, this Saturday night at Paycor Stadium when the Bengals take on the Buccaneers at 7 p.m. Skinny, how many of the starters will we see and for how long in the first preseason game?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we'll get a more clear answer on that today from Zach Taylor. But if I were to guess, I would say everybody but Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, and if you consider Trent Brown a starter, Trent Brown. And then Chris Rankle and I tried to attack this question on our training camp podcast yesterday. I said probably 7 to 10 plays for each. If the offense goes 3 and out, I think you'd see them for a second series. If they moved the ball and got a couple of first downs and ran 7 to 10 plays and didn't score, I don't think you'd see them again, just enough to get their feet wet. And I think the same for the defense. If they got a 3 and out, I think you'd see them back out there one more series. If a team, drove it on them and got a couple of first downs and they forced a punt or scored or whatever, I don't think you'd see them again. Maybe you would if they scored quickly to say, hey, that wasn't very good. Let's go do it right on this next series. But yeah, I don't think it'll be a lot, but I do think it'll be it'll be some.
Skinny, who are you most interested to see, given it's this early, play in a preseason game?
Joe Burrow. I want to see how he reacts when he gets hit and has to go down. How does he brace his fall? How does that fall affect him? I will tell you, Rick, I think the last handful of practices, he has looked really, really sharp. I thought yesterday he was really good. I mean, made some throws on the run across his body. It looked like, okay, that's Joe Burrow. That's the guy that I've seen before. I mean, the throw he made to Shedrick Jackson on Friday on the run, kind of scrambling out to his right and just flicked it down the field to Shedrick Jackson, who was behind the defense about 65 yards, was a thing of beauty. And the ball looks like it's spinning better out of his hands, all those things, but he's not gotten hit yet, right? And he knows that. He knows he needs to get hit. He needs to feel how it's going to feel when he braces his fall and, has people around him. And that can become a worry too. Like, the mental part of, I don't want to get hit with this wrist. I mean, is it there? Because it's not there now because you don't fear it in a practice. It may happen by accident, but you don't fear it. You can fear that in a game. And so I'm really interested in how Joe Burrow reacts to that.
Who's getting the extra reps on the defensive line from that situation that we talked about earlier?
Yeah, probably Zach Carter. Sheldon Rankins isn't hurt, but he's a vet, so they may have given him a little bit of time off. And then the ends, Miles Murphy and Joseph Osai. And I think they both have had their moments. Unfortunately for Murphy, he's gone up against Mims, and Mims has just owned him. And I think, honestly, I know people are going to look and go, oh, that's probably an indictment on Miles Murphy. I don't see it as that. I see it as, and I talked to Frank Pollock about this yesterday. I said, I've never seen a guy the size of Miles Murphy get enveloped like he did by Mims. And he said, yeah, I saw that a couple times too. And it's just freakish how big that kid is. And then he still is able to lock you up and move his feet. And usually, when you talk to coaches about rookies this time of year, Rick, and it's probably when you're talking to a basketball coach about a freshman, you're usually getting that, yeah, he's got a long way to go. It's early. Frank Pollock gushes about this guy. I mean, wow. And I think that tells you where he is with Amarius Mims and where Mims is in his progress.
Because the punter battle seems so wide open right now, is it going to be a situation where, we're just charting each of these guys' punt? Like, this guy had a good one, put a check mark in his name. This guy had a bad one, put an X next to his name. Each punt, they're just trading off and kind of battling it out here.
Hey, I'll tell you what, Darren Simmons charts everything. He charts every practice punt. He charts it all. A few years ago, remember when Randy Bullock beat out Jake Elliott and Bengals fans were going crazy, and Jake's gone on to a nice career with Philadelphia, but Darren's point, and having watched those practices and charting a chunk of it myself, Randy Bullock outkicked him. I mean, if you're going to have a competition, you just don't go, well, it's okay. I still think this other guy's got great potential, but yeah, the other guy, again, if you're going to have a straight competition, let's do it. And I think Darren Simmons is really good at that.
They forgot to check calf toughness for Randy Bullock. His calves just couldn't hold up, man.
Not in that opener. That cost him.
Is there anyone else? Is there another position group to watch or
the wide receivers
specifically?
Yeah, the wide receivers, I think for sure. Again, that whole group from Yoshavash to Charlie Jones to Burton, to Akeem Butler to Shedrick Jackson. Again, they're all going to play with different quarterbacks, right? So maybe that's not fair to completely gauge it. They're all going to play against different competition levels. I don't know what Tampa's doing as far as playing their starters either. But, some of those guys, it'll be backups versus backups. But, let's see what they've got. And then the cornerback situation. Dax Hill has been up and down. I think DJ Turner's had a pretty good camp. And I think the rookie Josh Newton's had a great camp at corner, the rookie corner. I like to see what those guys can do as well. And so, some of those battles I think are very important. And the Osai Murphy thing, let's see what Murphy can do when he's not going against Amarius Mims. Maybe it really is Mims is just that damn good. And Murphy's having a hard time against a guy who's a future All-Pro for all I know. That's a big step forward. I know saying that it is, but I mean, maybe he is. And that's just the poor Miles Murphy going up against that kid every day in camp. But Joseph Osai, I mean, he beat Orlando Brown a couple times the other day, once for a safety, and has looked pretty good in camp so far.
I'll wrap up our Bengals segment by doing our obligatory. We talked about the punters. I haven't referenced him in a few weeks. Drew Chrisman. I did want to mention, I think he has finally turned the
TikTok
page
star
on the NFL punting career. I noticed his social media posts now have gone from sneaking onto high school fields to punt to now he has started a moving business. He has bought a moving franchise. So Drew Chrisman, shout out to him. I don't think he will be back punting for the Bengals anymore.
I do find it odd that listen, he had the terrible punt in Kansas City, right? It
Right.
cost him his job. I'm still shocked that another team hadn't given him an opportunity. I mean, it's not like if you look at his numbers the year he punted with the Bengals, he averaged 37 yards a punt, for goodness sakes. He's got a big leg. But I do wonder if the weirdness of TikTok has made teams go, yeah, no, I don't need that cat around.
Well, I don't think it's that, but it is weird how, like, once you're out with some of this stuff, if you're a fringe guy, sometimes you just never get the chance to get back in. Like, I don't think Drew Chrisman is much different from the bottom third of the punters in the NFL.
Absolutely agree.
And like, even since he left, I feel like the Bengals punting situation has been more unstable than the when he was here. Quite honestly, it's been more of a concern the last few seasons. So I don't know. It's just it is a weird thing. I feel bad for the guy, but his social media posts have kept me entertained for certain.
Actually, I had not seen them, but we were talking about him actually in camp the other day, and a couple people referenced the moving company in his new business. I'm like, all right, well, he's turned the page, and good for him.
Yeah. All right. Let's put a bow on the Bengals segment here. Move on to the Reds. They went 3-4 since we last spoke. They are now 55-59, last in the NL Central, and 9 games back of the first place Brewers. Skinny, the number that people keep throwing out, because last year 2 teams got into the playoffs with a wild card spot, only winning 84 games. So that's the number a lot of people have thrown out. If you can get to about 84 wins, maybe you'll have a chance. The Reds would need to go 29-19 the rest of the way to get to 84 wins. When you hear that, where are you at with this team? Is it now just time to watch Ellie De La Cruz and Hunter Green and enjoy what you can?
Yeah, and Rick, I'll be honest with you. I'm based on the team's records that are in the wild card race right now. I think the Mets are the first team out, and I believe I'm doing this off the top of my head. I don't know if you have it handy. I think they're 59-54. I think something like that. I think all the teams in the wild card race are probably on pace for 87, 88 wins.
They are 60-54.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go. I mean, I think you're going to have to win at least 87 games to get in. And then if you do the math on 87 games, that makes the Reds have to win 32 of their final whatever's left. I mean, it feels mathematically impossible.
Yeah, I mean, there was I was looking back to just last year even to be like, okay, when they were hot last year, did they have a stretch like this that would be good enough? And they did. They had the stretch last year in June where they went 18-9 because they had a 12-game winning streak at one point, and then they went 15-11 in July. So they were 33-20 between those 2 months. They had a stretch of 29-10 baseball within that. So could they pull off a miraculous stretch to get them around 84, 85 wins? Yes, but one, they're showing no real signs of putting together that type of streak right now. And 2, it's the likelihood of them reeling off 12 wins in a row again is very unlikely, especially with this group. So Skinny, they have been able to make a little headway here playing against the Marlins for the last few days, who are just an abomination of a Major League Baseball team. I wanted to play a quick game with you. How confident are you in that you could name the Marlins roster right now, guys on the Marlins roster?
Not at all. Not now that Jazz Chisholm's gone and those guys. I looked at their roster the other day and none of the names resonated. I was just looking at when they had their lineup, and then some of those box scores on ESPN or CBS Sports Web, their average, their on base percentage, their OPS, and I went right down one of those the day. I went, God, they're awful.
Would you rather me give you the name or the position and you try to
Now,
match it?
give me a name, and I'll try to get the position.
Okay, Xavier Edwards.
Xavier feels like a shortstop to me.
Nailed it.
All right.
Batting leadoff, playing short.
All right.
Jake Berger, you probably know him.
He's a first baseman, maybe?
DH, right? DH
Okay.
mostly right now, but yeah. Jonah Bride.
Jonas sounds like a right field. He'd stick him out in right field.
He's the first baseman.
Okay.
What about Jesus Sanchez?
Old man Sanchez, this kid plays third.
that's the right fielder. What about Otto Lopez?
Otto Lopez has to catch. A guy named Otto has to catch.
He's the second baseman.
Damn.
Derek Hill.
Derek Hill has to catch.
He's the left fielder, but he could be literally anything, anyone, any team. Every team has a Derek Hill on the roster.
Yeah, they sure do.
Emmanuel Rivera.
That's the center fielder.
That's the third baseman.
Okay, close enough.
Christian Pash.
He catches.
That's the center fielder.
Well.
Elise Sanchez.
Well, Ellie has to catch.
He catches. That's right.
So that,
I mean, I only did that to you not to.
I've done that to a couple teams.
I didn't know a single guy. I didn't know one player.
So it's funny you say that. If you gave me rosters from 1975 and said, could you name the starting lineup for this team? I could do it. I can't do it today. And maybe it's because of free agency and whatnot. I can't do it for very many teams. I can do it for some. I can't do it for very many. I can't name probably 5 players off a lot of teams. And I'm serious. If you go to Baseball Reference right now, pick a 1975 team, I could probably come damn close to getting their starting lineup. I mean, I really could.
I'm the same way with a lot of teams today, in that I don't know as many players as I would expect to, or that I think I could. But Skinny, most of the teams, they've got 3 or 4 guys that are fairly household names, or at least bona fide major leaguers that that guy, I know his position. I know his story a little bit. I looked at this Marlins lineup the last few days, and honest to God, I couldn't name a single guy, couldn't tell you what position he played, have no idea where he came from. It's wild to see a team that looks like this.
The funny part is the White Sox are worse, and I could actually name White Sox players. And maybe it's because I've gone there perversely to keep looking at how bad they truly are. They did end their 21-game losing streak last night.
Excellent. I mean, what are we doing here? Skinny, Bristol Motor Speedway will host a game between the Atlanta Braves and the Cincinnati Reds next year on August 2nd, 2025. Does the Reds playing the Braves at Bristol Motor Speedway do anything for you?
It's pretty cool. I don't think I'd want to go because the crowd would be too much, and trying to get out of that place would be a zoo. But looking at what the configuration is, I was talking to a guy yesterday who's familiar with auto racing and familiar with that track, and he actually pulled up a photo that I had not seen of what the configuration might look like. And they do have like this big like video board that would hang right over the field, and they're going to have to do something with that, I would assume. I can't imagine it's going to be in play. There's not going to be a lot of foul room line, but I do think it's cool, and I think they picked, if you're going to do it at that part, you got a lot of Reds country fans can drive there, and certainly a lot of Braves country fans that can drive there, and I think they'll pack the place.
So because the Speedway is like a big oval, essentially, looking at the picture. Do they have it angled like you would expect, sort of like a football setup, where they just kind of shove it into one of the end zones?
Yeah, they're shoving it. It looks like kind of at a cockeyed corner, to where I don't think the dimensions in the left field will be very long. I really don't. I think it's got a chance to be a bandbox, but I do think it's going to be kind of cool.
I mean, I guess I kind of like whenever they do weird on-site events like this. I mean, when they do like the Navy ship game in college basketball they've done in the past, that's always been cool. So I do like some
hockey outside.
Yeah, and they've done the Field of Dreams game. So there are some different setups like that have made it fun. Those are usually pretty cool to watch. Just looking at it, trying to visualize it, I didn't see the picture you're talking about where they might have shown how it would be set up. Trying to visualize it myself, I was like, this doesn't seem like it would be made for a baseball.
And so I said this, and that's what I said to the person I was talking to, and they said, yeah, there's just enough room to squeeze it in. And he said, I did see a photo too, and that's when he showed it to me. I said, yeah, I was guessing there wouldn't be much foul territory. You know, they played obviously a football game there, Tennessee and Virginia Tech a couple years ago, and I could see that. I could see the football field.
Yeah. All right, Skinny, catcher Tucker Barnhart agreed to a minor league deal with the Reds. The team announced on Tuesday. The 33-year-old was released by the Arizona Diamondbacks last month, and we received a question on this as well. You got 4 options here. Tucker Barnhart's return to the Reds organization in the minor leagues is because, 1, he's the manager in waiting to replace David Bell next season, much like David Ross. 2, the Reds are going to promote Rhett Lauder there, and Barnhart will be as Crash Davis. 3, the organization is very desperate for catching depth given the Austin Wynns injury. Or 4, he needs less than a year of MLB time to reach 10 years to get MLB pension and would take anything offered.
Those are all 4 really good choices. Can I rank them instead of picking one?
Yeah, because it's probably a few different things played a role in it, right?
Yeah, I do think the catching depth is just horrifying, and so that's one of the reasons they brought him in. I think that's first and foremost. Could they be doing him a solid to get him to 10th, to get him to his 10th year in pension? I could see them being human in that regard and doing that. I don't think that's out of the realm. The manager in waiting is interesting. Tucker Barnhart's very well liked here, and I think there'd be a honeymoon period just because of how well liked he is. But I would hope he's not another cookie cutter, go by the analytics. My pitcher can only pitch 1 inning, and even though he just got 3 outs and 8 pitches, I got to go to my next guy because that's what the book says. I'm just sick of David Bell and all these managers managing that way. I've had enough of it. And the last one is, I don't think Rhett Lauder is really a Nuke LaLoosh type. He doesn't. I know he kind of has the look like that, right? But he's actually got pretty good control and pretty good stuff. And he's actually had a really good stint here of late in Chattanooga. He struggled there for a while, but it seems like he's kind of figured some things out. So I would put that probably last on the list. But they're all legitimate. They're all legitimate points.
Luke Maley is. I don't think he has a contract past this year, right?
And I can't see them. I just can't see it.
I was thinking they probably, because they don't really have much of a depth at catcher or a plan in place for catcher. I was thinking they would maybe re-sign him to a minimum deal.
Maybe
he's well liked. He's a veteran in the clubhouse, but I'm wondering, is this maybe writing on the wall that Tucker Barnhart is going to be that guy next year as kind of the veteran backup catcher to be the guy in the clubhouse instead of Luke?
So then Luke goes down to AAA maybe, and then he becomes the manager in waiting down there, right?
Maybe he's given a couple speeches this year already that got the ball club going allegedly.
No, I don't know what Tucker's aspirations are. I mean, catchers make good managers usually, right? For whatever reason, maybe just because they're so involved in games. But boy, that's a big leap for a guy to have no experience. I know David Ross did that. I just don't know if that's what you would do. I don't
feel. I mean, not that David Ross was like a star, but there's a little bit of difference from being a guy who was on a World Series winning team that then takes over as manager to.
I'd argue Tucker Barnhart was a better overall player.
Yeah, probably fair, but I don't know. I just do you think he would have that type of support and that type of
It's a great question. Again, I
find him to be the manager.
Maybe this is the box you're thinking about of moving on from David Bell and putting a guy down there to learn from Pat Kelly, who's been a great AAA manager for them. And I could argue, why wouldn't Pat Kelly get a shot up here if that's the case? But maybe they like him in the developmental role he's in. He's done it for a long, long time, and they feel comfortable with him there. And again, he doesn't have probably as much cachet as a Tucker Barnhart, former player in the organization. But that doesn't seem far-fetched. But I think of all the scenarios that were laid out there, the one that's the most likely to me is they just don't have a lot of depth, and they need a body just in case something happens to Tyler Stevenson or Luke Maley down, and maybe bring up a third guy in September. And again, the other one to me is, maybe they are doing him enough of a solid to get him that 10-year pension.
Yeah, I mean, he's looking for a landing spot too, right? I mean, it's not like there's a ton of people knocking down his door for his services either. So just kind of I mean, look, I'm on record as saying I could care less who is the manager of the Reds. Right. I don't really think it makes that big of a difference. He's as good as any of the options I've heard thrown out there. If for some reason that is something they're thinking about, it wouldn't bother me in the slightest.
Give me Kevin Gray from Beechwood or Kurt Bly from Mason. I mean, honestly, these guys
they'd be just as good, if not better.
They would be.
Actually, Kevin Gray would be better than David Bell. I
think he would be too. I honestly think he would be, because I think Kevin would do some things with his gut. I mean, and it just feels like it's just so cookie cuttered anymore that, hey, I bring in this guy and he gets me 3 great outs and he looks good doing it, but by God, no reason to bring him out for the next inning because I got Fred warming up. Well, then Fred might suck that. I'm just so sick of the way the game is managed today. It's ridiculous. Can anybody do things not by the damn book? Because then what happens is when things go awry, well, I had my 8th inning guy ready. He just didn't have it today. Well, you know what? Your 7th inning guy sure as hell did. He could have pitched the 8th inning.
We could go on with the Red segment and talk about another week where Hunter Green was the man and Ellie De La
Ridiculous.
Cruz did something where he's like one of only 4 players to ever do or whatever. But like at this point, Skinny, that's the show every week. We just basically say that. So we'll acknowledge that those two are awesome. It's really fun watching them, but I don't really have anything too interesting to add to the conversation about those two guys at this point anymore.
I don't either.
They've been a joy to watch this year.
I mean, some of the things that they've done this year have just been ridiculous. I mean, if there's a part of this year that Reds fans certainly should take away, it's the two guys who are been kind of the centerpiece of what you're trying to rebuild around and start with have grown up, and I still think they got more growing to do, and that's I think that would be super exciting.
Yeah, let's get into some Ask Skinny Anything. We'll start with, what's your most interesting summer take about the local college basketball teams? I guess this is with the practices wrapping up here and guys getting ready with a little break here before school starts.
I really don't. I guess I don't have one because it probably would all surround the transfer portal and what the teams did and how that's kind of shaking out for each team. I think everybody of main local interest would be Xavier, UC, Kentucky, and NKU. I think they all got better, and I think that's the important part. I was listening to a show out of Lexington. You listen to it on occasion, Kentucky Sports Radio, and apparently people who've seen Kentucky's practices are glowing about Lance Robinson being a stud.
Jackson Robinson.
Or Jackson Robinson, rather. Sorry. Yeah. Jackson Robinson. Lance Robinson plays for the Bengals. He's a cornerback. That's where my mind is. Yeah. And so, again, those are just reports from summer practices. That doesn't always mean everything, but I just think the fact that all of them improved themselves on their rosters.
But that's really interesting to me that they're talking about Jackson Robinson like that, because one of my thoughts has been, I wonder if Kentucky really has an alpha on this team. Like if they have a go-to best player, that would concern me a little bit. So if I'm a Kentucky fan, I'm excited about those reports about Jackson Robinson. Now, the concern there is like, is he standing out because the rest of the roster isn't as talented as you'd like it to be? And he's kind of one of the only dudes out there that looks like an NBA guy on this roster? Or is it he's really a full-blown NBA draft pick type guy next year, and then you've got some guys like Andrew Carr and Kobe Bryant go around him that are going to be able to fill it up as well. That's what I'm interested to see about Kentucky. But like, as I sit here right now in July or in August, first week of August now, I'm concerned about who their go-to, if they have enough firepower on the offensive side, like who their go-to options are.
Yeah, the same person who I guess they got this report from practice said when this team gets hot, it's like they've never seen a team shoot the ball like that. Like when they get hot and on a roll, they're ridiculous. Now, that's probably the same can be said of a lot of teams, but I think this team does have a lot of snipers on it.
In fairness, this is the first time anyone in Lexington has watched a team practice shooting in a while. So it's a little bit different than watching oops and watching fast break play all of practice. So
the other one was, and I got an article sent to me, Rick, and you may have gotten the same one or seen it. The concept of where some teams in the Horizon League could be heading in the future. And I saw NKU get mentioned with the Missouri Valley Conference. Could you see that?
No.
Okay.
I couldn't. I don't really know why NKU people want to leave the Horizon League to begin with. I don't think they've dominated that at a level that would mean they should leave it to begin with. I think when you look at what just happened to the other teams that have left, like Valpo was dominating this conference, was heads and shoulders above the other teams in this conference when NKU joined. They left for the Missouri Valley and they haven't been heard from since.
That's fair.
They've been at the bottom of it. So I don't think that's a good idea. I've heard more buzz about NKU and the Atlantic 10, quite honestly.
Interesting.
I don't know how good of an idea that those decisions are certainly made above my pay grade. And, They did a good job guiding them to get to Division I, and it's worked out so far. So I guess I'd give them the benefit of the doubt if they made a decision to do that. But I think the Horizon League is great. It's a really competitive league.
I like NKU. it. I'm just telling you. Did you see the same story I'm talking about?
Yeah, but that's also just a fan who just
understood. Yeah, understood. But it piqued my interest. The other thing, though, it does involve NKU is this from the summer. Because I've got a couple of friends of mine that were season ticket holders, and they're trying to get that premium for the season ticket holders to pay like a seat license fee, and they just said thanks, but no thanks. And I wonder how many people will do that.
That's what it'll be interesting to see how many of the because it's the premium seats. It's the people who sit like right on the sideline. The seats
my guy's about 3 or 4 rows up in the upper deck, and they're asking him to pay.
Well, but what I'm saying is the people who had the biggest
like the
people who are always at the games, the sideline people right there, courtside,
Yep.
that usually fill up. Because you can talk about, a Horizon League game isn't always full, and you're like, well, how many people were there to begin with? But those seats that were always filled, the first 3-4 rows, I'm wondering how many of those people are changing their minds about season tickets, because if those seats aren't filled, then it'll start looking a lot different there. If you need that base, I feel like, the people that are always at your games to kind of fill those seats up.
Well, I told my guy, I said, you do this. I said, because he said he got a phone call and they were asking him to do it. And he said, nope, not going to do it. I said, how about you call them? He said, well, your seats are going to be given away then. I'm like, they're not going to be given away. I said, here's what you do. Call them in another month and say, yeah, you know what? I'll get my season tickets back for a 25% discount. Let's see where that goes.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that's been talked about over there in terms of storylines. About,
and I don't want to put you on the spot. You cover NKU games.
Yeah, you're putting me in a bad spot here.
No, I know. And so I for full disclosure, this is me with the beef on this. I just don't understand what they're doing with that. And I'm not asking you to respond to that, Rick. I'll just say, because I brought the topic up, I just don't understand what the point of this was. I know they thought they could maybe use it as a windfall to raise more money, but to me, you're pissing off your most loyal fans, and you don't have enough of a fan base to piss them off. I'm sorry about that.
All right. All three of the other teams aside from Kentucky, I've got a similar take about all of them, though. I think all three of them have an issue of trying to get their best five on the floor. Like there's going to be someone left out for all three of those teams. For UC, I feel like that guy might be Connor Hickman, the transfer they just got from Bradley.
Yeah, but you say that, but does that not mean he gets 28 minutes a game in a bench role?
Well, he could, but even if that's the case, then that's still
good.
Means one of your starters isn't playing the majority of the minutes, right? So, like, my point is, all of these teams seem to have a situation where it's like they're fighting between getting their best five players on the floor together versus the five that maybe fit your lineup best or are your traditional lineup type pieces. In UC's case, I think, like, if you play their best players, you probably have to take Hickman, or I can't imagine they take Simas Lukosius off the floor or Dan Skillings off the floor. So one of those guys are coming out. It's probably going to be Hickman, but in that case, then you're back in a situation similar to last year where it's like, do you have enough shooting with just Simas Lukosius and Dan Skillings as your main perimeter options?
So that's what I wonder, if you don't go with those three, Jizzle, James, and probably the kid from Texas as your big. You're probably a little bit smaller than the rest of the teams in the Big 12, but does that give you more offensive firepower to just simply say, listen, we'll try to get stops, and we think we have enough functional length to rebound with that group and go with that? I think it is interesting.
That's the lineup that I would prefer, quite honestly, for them. But there is Assis Bandago there. It's hard to imagine him not starting. Like you said, Dylan Mitchell came over. It's hard to imagine him not starting. And you've also got to factor in, like, they promised these guys certain things. They paid them certain NIL dollars when they came here. It's changing a little bit in terms of how you do these things and how you handle them.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is, and this is apples to oranges, I realize that, but I do love the way Steve Kerr has managed the Olympic roster. I like the second group that comes in. You get a little more rim protection there, but you still have some scores, and maybe that's what you do. Maybe you determine my bench is, I got to have a scorer come off the bench, and I'm going to play my bench a little bit more, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that either.
No, and it's not really, I'm not so as much hung up on the starters necessarily, but it's just like, even if you're putting one of your bench players in a lot more, then that means one of the starters is still not playing as much. So it's like, it's hard to figure out who the best five are for each team, or who the five are that are going to get the most minutes. For Xavier, I think you're in a similar spot. One is partly you just don't know where Jerome Hunter is going to be. Like,
I was going to say, I think that's the biggest part of it, but let's assume, for argument's sake, he's back to his old self.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so then is it like, now Zach Freemantle, who we've seen in the past, isn't an ideal center. He's much more suited to play the power forward, but like,
he sure can score.
Well, he's going to play one of the two positions, right? So it's like a matter of, do you play him a little out of position because you feel like you're best with him and Jerome at the same time? Or is Zach always going to be the four because that's where he's best, and you have another option at center, whether it be Lassina Traore from Long Beach State or it be John Hughley, who transferred from Oklahoma, one of those two. I think that's going to be hard to figure out too, because there's also like Dalen Swain could play the four in a small ball lineup with Zach Freemantle. That might end up being your best, most talented lineup. But how do you do that? Because you've got three perimeter players that are almost certainly going to start in Davion McKnight, Dante Maddox Jr., and Ryan Conwell. I mean, so you still have Dalen Swain, Trey Green.
But we're talking mostly rotational. I know what you're saying. I know, games on the line, five best on the floor. It feels like there's so much stoppage of play, you can almost mix and match at the end of games.
Yeah. And for like UC's perspective, that works even better because it's like we're talking in UC's case, it's like
literal
Connor
offense,
Higgins is
defense.
the offensive lineup,
Right.
you're the shooter, and then you can go Dylan Mitchell, Assis Bandego, like get the best, biggest athletic guys on the floor for defense if you're going offense, defense. For Xavier, it's like, I don't know if there's a clear like offense defensive lineup
Right.
for them. It's more like, how is the front court going to shake out? And then are you playing bigger? Are you playing smaller? There's a lot to be figured out there.
Right. The one thing I would say though is even in a perfect world, let's just assume for argument's sake, Zach Fremantle's back to himself in some way. So is Jerome Hunter. I mean, they can't be 34-minute a game guy. I think you have to have enough of a rotation up there that I think it works itself out from a minutes perspective. And maybe even because of where those guys are, they've been off for a period of time because of injuries and health and all those things, that they're 27-minute a game guys.
It's funny because Xavier's is the one where I feel like I have the worst answer for in terms of like, I really have almost no idea how it's going to play out.
Because you don't know what they're going to look like.
Exactly. And I spend more time focusing on them than anyone, but it's just like, we really have no ideas. Like, will John Hughley be in shape and healthy and playing well? Will Jerome Hunter be ready to play at the start of the season? We have no idea. At what point does Cameron Fletcher, the Florida State transfer, enter into the mix? Is Dalen Swain, he clearly looks better. He clearly physically looks like a monster. Is he going to make that jump from a basketball skills standpoint from freshman to sophomore year that warrants him playing a ton of minutes? So Xavier's, I think it'll shake itself out and it'll be obvious. In fact, they may not even have enough options. Like, it may be your only option is playing Zach Fremantle and Lassina Traore most of the minutes because those are the only two guys that are ready when the season starts, at least at a high level. But NKU is another one that I think is being overlooked because, Skinny, when you look at the roster, Dan Goresger, the Division II point guard from Michigan Tech, from everything I've heard, is like clear-cut, bona fide starter, definitely going to play a lot of minutes and start. So if he's your starting point guard and Sam Vinson, let's say he's back and he's your starting too, then it becomes a situation of like, do you go with Randall Pettis, who's really coming on at the end of his freshman year last year, is returning as another perimeter player on the wing? Or is Trey Robinson your kind of big small forward so you can get him, LJ Wells, and Keena Tijere all on the floor at the same time playing a bigger lineup? We've seen NKU was more effective at the end of last year when they went smaller and moved Trey Robinson down to the forward position, sometimes even the center position. But clearly those three front court players all are three of your best five players. So how do you work that out?
But I go back to, that's not a bad thing. I think it gives you a possibility to mix and match against different teams for different reasons.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I think Trey Robinson gives you that flexibility. I think Sam gives you that flexibility.
Yeah, I agree that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's more so just like, if you're talking about what's your take or storyline coming out of summer, it's like, man, there are some really interesting lineup situations that we're going to see unfold during preseason practice for all three of those four local teams. And then Kentucky, it's almost still like wide open in terms of what their lineup's going to look like, I feel like.
Yeah, have I mentioned the NKU ticket situation? Kidding.
Can we bring that back up and talk a little bit more about that? Is there anything that like NKU's athletic department's doing that's rubbing you the wrong way that we can address? Kenny?
Yeah, no, yeah, nothing at all.
Okay. When does, this is a good change of topic here. When does a beer taste best? I.e., after mowing, airport beer before a trip, tailgate beer, or celebrating after an important sports win? What's your favorite beer, Skinny?
After training camp practice driving home. I hate to say that.
You can't say
I hate to pull a Mike Gundy on you. I do. I hate to be the Mike Gundy. I will say, airport beer coming back from a trip, if it's like you're not going to either make it back for any of the press conference stuff just because your flight, you couldn't get a flight early enough, and your buds are going to share, and we all kind of share the Monday stuff because it's just press conference stuff anyway. That's usually a pretty good beer too, because like, I got nowhere to go. I'm going to be on a plane for a couple hours. No one can get to me. Nobody can bother me. This is about as relaxed as I'm going to be for the next week. That's a good beer too. I'm not going to lie. When
you just settle in and let go and realize, like, I'm not making it back. It just is what it is.
Yep. And you're through security at that point. There's no hassle. You're like, I'm a get to the airport early guy. I don't want to be rushing through security and freaking out about making my flight. I've flown for a long time in my life. And so I'm pretty good about that. And you know what? The quote unquote downside is, oh, I got 2 hours to kill in the airport bar. That sounds okay to me. And there's a game on or whatever. There's something on. So
after the NFL draft, you guys do your best beer of the year, right?
Yeah, it's called the best beer of the year. And that's a pretty good one because we used to go out on the Friday night of the draft. And it was kind of when the Bengals would draft early because you'd be done earlier. And you'd have a couple beers there, but Thursday's a late time. Fridays, you're burned out and it's going to be an early Saturday. So you're kind of have spent all this energy and effort working your ass off, and it's like, okay, it's all behind us. We have a day off tomorrow. We can all breathe now. And yeah, it is that is the best beer of the year. There's no question.
Can I throw out an under the radar one that doesn't get brought up enough?
Yes.
And we're about to hit it here in a couple weeks, which, by the way, in 2 weeks will be the first college football games. It's just like those first 4 games that none of the local teams will play. And then August 31st will be the first local game. So we will probably do our college football preview show next week.
Yep.
It makes the most sense. But the first Saturday of college football, that beer, like first kickoff, you're sitting down to watch and realize like you got a whole fall of football ahead of you. That's a pretty great beer too.
Yeah, I'm usually halftime of the 3:30 game, or I don't make it for the night games. That's usually my first. That's usually about a 5 o'clock crack the beer time. I will say there's something to be said about like cutting your grass or doing yard work or a project you were doing. And I'm not a big project guy. I'm really proud of the flower bed off to my left that I got all the rocks out of. I remulched. It looks really sharp. I really do like it. And I remember the last day we did that was about 4.5 hours in the sun. It was baking, but it was like, this is the only time we're going to get a chance to finish this because I'm going to be busy. Everybody's going to be busy. So got it done and took a shower. And it's one of those ones you get all the dirt off of you. You get a chance to finally go, that's a pretty good beer too.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're hot and then you drink a beer, you're hot and sweaty and then you drink a beer, it's usually a good situation.
Yes.
What is your favorite cheese?
Believe it or not, I love the mozzarella tomato. I can't think of the name of the salad. Caprese salad. Yeah. I love that. I could eat that salad. In fact, I had a next door neighbor that gave me some tomatoes, and I cut those up, and I had to go out and buy some mozzarella just to make. I made it like 5 straight nights and didn't get sick of it. I love it. That is
good.
That's my favorite. I'm a big Swiss cheese guy too. I mean, I it's funny, when I was a kid, my mom would always make me a ham sandwich. It's like felt like it was lunch every day in school. A ham sandwich with lettuce and
Swiss.
No, she didn't put Swiss on it at the time.
Oh.
And at the time I didn't like it. It was one of those ones I guess maybe the first time I smelled as a kid, it just didn't smell right to me. But now I cannot have like a ham sandwich or a roast beef sandwich or something like that without Swiss cheese on it.
All right. Yeah. I mean, hot ham and Swiss is always good.
Yeah.
And mushroom and Swiss burger is my go-to burger.
I know it is. Yeah, you said that. Yeah, I'm not a big cheese on burger guy. I can do it. Really? I will do it. No, I want to taste it.
You can do it. Of course you can do it. It's delicious.
But I want to do the burger is what I want to taste. I don't want to taste the cheese overpowering the burger.
Man, I don't know about overpowering. What kind of burgers are you eating? But who doesn't like a cheeseburger? That's insane. You lactose intolerant?
I would much I'll eat one. But I would much prefer just a hamburger.
I can't believe you said I will do it as if it was like a chore to eat a cheeseburger.
It's not a chore. That's a good point.
What is the most overrated regional food in the U.S.? Food items like Chicago deep dish pizza, Cincinnati style chili, Baltimore crab cakes. I'm not saying those are overrated, just giving you an idea of what I meant by regional food.
No, most regional food is good. I'll give you mine. He actually, I think, hit on the one that I don't like. I will tell you this. I love New York style pizza. There was a place when I lived in Peekskill, New York, which is about an hour north of the city. I lived there for a couple years as a kid. And there was a place in this little strip mall. This is back in the early 70s. That had New York style pizza, a place called Terrytown, and was the name of the city. And so 3 or 4 years, whenever the Bengals last played up there against the Giants on a Monday night, it was 4 or 5 years ago. I had a Monday. I think you and I and Chad Brendel had done our podcast that morning. And I'm like, what time am I going to do the rest of the day? I'm like, you know what? I'm going to drive to Peekskill. It's not very far. I haven't been back to my old haunt. I found the 2 old houses I lived in and the elementary schools I went to. But as I'm driving up, I'm like, some of this stuff just comes back to memory. I'm like, I came around this corner and I went, man, that pizza place used to be right in that little strip mall. And I'm like, I'm going to just pull in. I'm like, oh my God, there it was. Got me a nice slice from there. Tasted the same like it did back in the day. So yeah, like New York style pizza. I like deep dish pizza. I love Cincinnati chili. We all do. I love, Southern cooking. I love ribs where it's the place to have ribs, but I got to be honest with you. I don't know why. Cause I love crab. I cannot stand crab cakes.
Really?
I'll eat, like, we go to Baltimore as a group and we go to the same restaurant every year. Usually it's one of the media relations guys' favorites, and we like it. You can get something different each time. I mean, you can get different seafood stuff, but he usually gets crab cakes as an appetizer where everybody takes one. So you feel obligated. I take my one and it just, I got to find myself getting cocktail sauce and just killing it with cocktail sauce. It just doesn't. And again, I love crab legs. You can give me a thing of crab legs, I'd kill them. But for whatever reason, crab cakes, no.
What a tortured life you live. You will eat a cheeseburger. You will eat a crab cake if you're
Right.
forced, if your arm's
Correct.
twisted. I mean,
A
what a
tough
rough
life.
life you live over there.
And I
My
will
goodness.
wash that down with a cold beer. I mean, I will do that.
Yeah. The one that I think is just completely overrated is cheese curds from Wisconsin. I think that's
I don't
that's
like
a
those.
cheese stick. That's a crappy cheese sticks. I don't like cheese sticks. So
What about it's around here, but I thought this was more of a Pennsylvania thing. Poutine on fries.
overrated, I would say, but like sometimes it can be good.
Yeah. I'm kind of with you on that.
I like things on fries, but usually like chili cheese fries or just cheese fries or like some type of nacho fry situation is usually better than poutine. I find poutine is just like a lot of the gravies aren't good.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a fair point.
yeah, if it when it is good, it's very good, but it's just like a lot of them I find that not really good.
What about Philly
Um,
cheesesteaks in Philly?
I mean that's unbeatable,
Absolutely. Okay. I was glad you said that.
unbeatable.
I'm with you.
The one that I've grown out of that I used to love, I thought it was amazing. And now, like, as you would say, I'll eat it, but I mean, it's definitely not my favorite thing is deep dish, Chicago style.
I
Don't
don't get
love
it
it
a
anymore.
lot. I will say this: I love Bourbon House. I think I've said it before in the show, Bourbon House, but nobody in my family really liked it. They bow to my desire once a year, and we get it.
Yeah.
And the problem is, it's just so big that I eat a full piece, and I probably cut another half,
And you
and
feel
then it just kind of
terrible.
stays, and you feel terrible about it. And then nobody else wants the leftovers, and I'll maybe have a leftover piece here and there, but you can't like have three. You just can't do it. I can't do it at least. And
Even
so
when I go to Lou Malnati's in Chicago now, because we go every year still for NKU, and it's like even with that, I find myself like I want the thin pizza, not the deep dish. So
yeah, I'm more a thin crust guy. I'm kind of with you on that.
yeah, and New York style, I mean, honestly, you could give me a Ruby's dinner or like a really good New York style pizza. There's not much difference there for me. I'm kind of like the New York style pizza just as much as
I
I
love it.
like a great steak dinner.
Nah, I'd still go with the great steak dinner, but I'm with you. I love the New York style pizza.
All right, let's wrap it up with this. What's Skinny's biggest pet peeve for on-air people?
Biggest pet peeve. I guess not knowing how to pronounce words sometimes. I mean that
Like local street names or just like
well, just in general. So
normal words?
I will tell you this. The people that I heard has doing traffic, they're not local a lot of times. Some of them are. Our guy, Chuck Ingram. Our guy
Yeah.
Chuck Ingram is, and I love Chuck. He's one of my favorite people, not just in general. He's just a good dude.
Can
So
I ask
Chuck's
a
local.
question about that you would know
Yes.
the answer to, by the way? Do they actually like have a training where they have to learn to say 700 WLW the same way?
It's funny. They feel like they're all cookie cutters right now that are doing
Well,
it.
like they're trying to do an impression, or do they just be
Yeah.
like, do your best NPR sound or
Yeah,
something? Like,
yeah. But you get a lot of these people that are doing the traffic not from here. And the other day I got Ronald Reagan Cross Country Highway.
Ooh.
I mean, it is
well, I mean,
Ronald
that's not even a
Reagan.
local thing. That's like,
I
how
know,
do you not know how to say Ronald Reagan?
but it's also not cross country. It's cross county.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
We got Reading Road. It's just that's a pet peeve of mine. Just know how
Yeah.
to
A
pronounce.
lot of Reading Road on the local airwaves in the mornings, especially when they're doing traffic.
Yeah, correct. And that's yeah. I just again I get it. I mean, like I'll listen to WHAS in Louisville sometimes when I'm driving in my car, and I'll hear Chuck Ingram doing traffic reports for Louisville. I'm like, yeah, I'm hoping you're naming those names right, Chuck, because you're a pro's pro, and you probably are. But there's probably people in Louisville going, this friggin' idiot can't pronounce the Watterson Expressway correctly. He keeps calling it the Watterson. No, I mean, it's a pet peeve of mine. If you're gonna do something in a town, why don't you just call down and say, what are like the 20 hardest, like is it Marymount or Mariemont? Is it Reading or Reading? I mean, can you, is it Madeira or Madeira? I mean, can you just, some of the hardest ones to pronounce, can you just give me a little precursor on how to pronounce those, please?
I wouldn't necessarily call this my pet peeve, but it's something that I've been noticing a lot recently. I think it's because I've tried to break myself of the habit and improve on it, but I hear it all the time. No one can ask a question anymore. Like, I don't know if you know what I mean, but like everyone
Yes.
wants to tell someone else
And get the
what they know
reaction.
about something, give them a ton of information in it, start answering the question for the person before they've actually given them the question. And they're like rambling and they never actually deliver an actual question or don't don't get to it nearly quick enough or nearly clear enough. You can watch, because a lot of these things, like we do now, you can see it on YouTube as these interviews are being done or these podcasts are being done. And you can literally watch the interviewee's face trying to follow the question as they're going, like, wait, what are you asking? What are you talking about? Wait, we're over here now. And it's just like a lot of people now, the art of asking a short question has been completely lost.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think I asked one for Zach the other day about Trent Brown, and I think it was something about, how's he progress? I think I literally was, how is he progressing? I might have added one other part to that, and I got about a 45-second good answer out of it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. As a journalist, I think people have lost.
And trust me, I ask stupid questions like everybody. I'll be the first to. I can ask as dumb a question as anybody. And sometimes it's funny. Sometimes the dumbest questions get the best answers. That's the funny part to that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not always asking about us. I think that's where people screw up, is they try to not ask dumb questions. They try to ask thoughtful questions. They're like, look how much I know about what I'm asking you. And so you start saying all these words and going down these different routes. And like, when you actually hear that back in an audio format, it sounds terrible. Yeah. And I'm I've noticed it because I did it, and I'm trying to do it less and less when I ask questions. But yeah, it's something now that I just hear all over the place, whether it be at the Olympics or at Major League Baseball games I've been watching. Anything.
I would say, so I know this is a pet peeve of some people I know that are sports writers. It's the old, and I don't really have a anti-sentiment to it. I don't even know if I do it all that often. I probably do it some. Talk about your slider today, Jim, as opposed to, did you like the way your slider was going today? I mean, instead of it being a question, just talk about your.
Yeah. Does that bother you a lot or not really?
It really doesn't, but I know it bothers some.
Yeah. And I get where people are coming from of like, it's kind of a hack move. You haven't thought about your question well enough.
Right.
But I would also tell you that like a lot of times the only goal here is to get a good quote for all of us, right?
Correct.
That's the job for all of us. So sometimes just throwing it out there and being normal. Now, we don't typically tell someone, hey, just talk about this, but we kind of get that in this format. We've been doing it long enough. It's been said long enough that sometimes just saying, hey, can you talk about that play that happened is enough to get a guy rolling. And then you can ask follow-ups from there and get more detailed from there. But like, now there are some people that I've been in press rooms with, and every question they ask is talk about this, talk about that, talk about that. It's like, okay, well, come up with one question would be nice, but like, I don't, when people let it slip out every now and then, I don't like oh man, that guy's not a journalist or anything like that.
Yeah. I like it.
All right, that's all I got.
Appreciate the questions very much. We'll be back next week. The Bengals will have a preseason game under their belt. We'll see if the Reds are still alive and kicking, what other great things Ellie De La Cruz will do, and or Hunter Green, and much, much more. We'll even talk some college football, which is right around the corner. For Rick Brewing, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly Potpourri edition, presented by Blake, the Attorney Maislin.